Welcome to A Better Me, A Better You, A Better Us podcast series at the School of Dentistry here at the University of Leeds. I'm Tamora Shemwood and I'm the School Academic Lead for Inclusive Pedagogies, aka the SALIP, and I will be your host again for today's session. So today I'm joined by student SALIP rep and School of Dentistry student Aliysha Rahman. And again, luckily enough, Simon has stayed on for us, and we have culture change advocate Dr. Simon Fleming.
Oh, thank you for having me. Again.
Again.
You say again, you sound like, again.
Sorry. Aliysha and I will be picking Simon's brains about how to address negative behaviour and exploring how to use the cup of coffee conversation. So, I think it's safe to say that we've all seen or indeed demonstrated some negative behaviours, but what's the best way to address those negative behaviours, and what's the idea around the cup of coffee conversation?
So, what it comes down to is the cup of coffee conversation acknowledges that most of us are normal human beings with normal behaviours who go through life managing to be absolutely fine with what I guess most of us would consider just normal conversations. Don't do that. Oh, mate, that was not cool. Whatever. And you go, oh, yeah, all right, fine. The cup of coffee conversation model from Vanderbilt recognises that in the workplace in particular, people might demonstrate an unprofessional behaviour. And that's the language they use, and there's probably more work to be done about the social construct that is professionalism. But a behaviour that isn't acceptable for the workplace, and how you might challenge that in a way that brings around change in the person, but also if that change is not demonstrable or the behaviour is not okay, has accountability. Because most places think they have policies for having these conversations. Yeah. And actually when you ask people, they go, well, I speak to their boss, or I guess, I don't know, HR. And that's kind of where it ends. And then you ask HR, and HR go, we have very clear HR policies. And you go, could I see them? And they're like, not really. Or you become aware that a lot of HR policies, and I have friends who work in HR, it is a necessary part of running a successful organisation, but human resources, often their priority is protecting the organisation.
Yeah.
Which means their priority isn't necessarily the minutiae of that behaviour or that individual or that department or that whatever. Their job is the organisation, managing the human beings that keep that organisation afloat. And so Vanderbilt came up with this model that allows you to have a quite structured system for how to have ever increasingly significant and recorded conversations with ever increasingly severe consequences if change is not demonstrated, is the principle.
I think that's really interesting, and when I reflect on my own behaviours, I think I've definitely let things slide that shouldn't have, and probably done stuff as well myself. Well, not probably, definitely. But I think one of the things that, if I were to really think, well, why did I choose not to step up and call that out or address that, is because it felt like a real leap up. Like, actually, this is something that needs addressing, but it could actually put that person in a position where they are being formally disciplined. And that in itself, for me, I think has been a barrier. Is this bad enough? So most things, I think, have fallen under that threshold of, okay, what can I not let go? Which means that those kind of little everyday things that are the things that really do form our culture, I think are harder to address. But with the idea of having this extra level, I wonder if that's really helpful.
Most of our systems are 0 to 60, right? They're nothing, or they're, I'm going to report you and you're going to be, beheaded and have your head stuck on a pike. Like that's the systems we have in place, right? It's not, could I, Aliysha, could I just chat to you about some of the stuff you said today in our tutorial? Just you and me, we'll go have a conversation about some of the stuff you said. It's like, well, now I have to speak to your tutor, and I'm going to have to send some emails, and I'm going to CC in a load of really important people. And this will probably be, well, I don't know, fitness to practice maybe. And you're like, wait, what? What did I do? What's happening? And most behaviours fall under that, right? Most behaviours fall under that. And so because most organisations don't have a system in place to do that, and most people, especially in the heat of the moment, don't really know what to do. And so Vanderbilt designed this idea of the informal formal, right? The informal cup of coffee conversation. And you don't actually have to buy them a cup of coffee because it could become prohibitively expensive, right? But it's about a conversation where neither of you are in the other person's place of power. You're also not necessarily in like a super public place like a corridor. And it's a reflective conversation. Can I tell you either how that made me feel, or if you've been asked to be an advocate, can I tell you how that made other people feel? And you have to set aside some time. It's not a 2-minute corridor on the way to a thing. By the way, you're a racist. What? Anyway, think about it. It's you have to take the time to go, can we unpack this a little bit? Can we explore why it's not okay, why we don't think it's okay anymore? And it also gives everyone a chance to change how they see the world and how they behave. And the evidence from this work suggests that most people do change from that conversation. And you're right, it's because everything above that is all a bit scary and punchy and I would hope that if I what's an example? If I misgendered someone.
Yes.
Right? If I misgendered someone, I would hope someone would have a word with me about it. I would hope that someone would correct me and call me up on it. I would hope that their first call wouldn't be an email to the GMC or to my chief executive or to my line manager. But most people are like, I don't know what the middle ground is. What does that look like? And that's where this comes in. It's a thing that is not okay, but you would hope that with a thoughtful and reflective conversation, there will be a change in their behaviours, which means it doesn't happen again.
Can I just ask, in terms of human nature, when you're having a conversation with someone, say you've been directly a result of someone's bad behaviour or a negative thought, do you think that emotionality comes into play with that? Do you think it's important to rationalise your emotions when you're speaking to someone? And if you feel like you're going to be too emotional or adversely come in attacking them more so, do you think it's important to get someone else to speak on your behalf?
That's an awesome question. So there's a paper by Cocker about active bystanders, and one of the D's, he talked about the D's of bystander training, and it's like delegate, declare, and what have you. And one of it, they're not all separate. So there's like delegate and delay. So I don't think it's unfair to take some time to get your own thoughts in order and to frame your own thoughts before you ask to have that conversation. And of course, again, there's context, right? Because maybe you want to have it in the heat of the moment because you know that once the moment passes, you know yourself, you're like, I'm not gonna come back to this.
Yeah.
Equally, there's some real nuance around the language around emotion. And we know that, for example, women and people of colour are often accused of being emotional.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm not emotional, right? I'm assertive, right? And so part of it is about reflecting on whether your feelings are well-founded, at which point you go for it.
Yeah.
And be like, no, this is how it made me feel. It makes me feel small and stupid, and it makes me feel like you don't respect me.
Yeah.
And that is undeniably okay. Now, if you are like, I'm 2 seconds away from punching this guy in the neck, yeah, you need to take a step back. Because the goal is change. And this is really hard. And I have a memory of being at a conference. And the session was around Indigenous people, which we don't really have in the UK, but in Canada and America in particular, and Australia, they have First Nations people.
Yeah.
And there were some amazing sessions, and it was in the Q&A, and the chairperson, who was a Caucasian, a white Canadian, said, my first question, chair's prerogative, is to our speakers, which is, as a person of power and privilege, how can I help? And the anger that came out from the response caught everyone a bit off guard. And one of the speakers stood up and was like, I don't want your help. You are not my saviour. I don't want you here. And like, it just, the whole thing turned and it all had to be kind of de-escalated and all the rest. And part of it is recognising that anger is righteous and right and not to be ignored or undermined. On the other hand, our goal is still to bring around change and learning in these people.
Yeah.
So there is a nuance to be had. And if you think, look, I can have this conversation and I can sit down with this person who continuously demonstrates these behaviours, and I think I can bring around change in them with an understanding, of course, that if they don't change, accountability is on its way, right?
Yeah.
You go for it. If, on the other hand, you're like, I don't think I can have this conversation and in a way that does it justice, or quite commonly, more commonly actually, just I don't think I'm near to peer enough that they will even listen to me.
Yeah.
They will not hear me. You can combine that delay and that delegate tactic to bring in an ally, an advocate. And I've been asked to have a lot of those conversations with people where they're like, either I hate this guy so much, or I just don't think they'll listen to me. The flip side is when people reach out to me and they go, I've had this conversation with him a bunch of times and I don't think he's listening. And I'm like, well, it sounds to me a lot like it's time to escalate.
Yeah.
Because what you don't want is for them to be like, Mr. Fleming, you've been bought 400 cups of coffee this year and you appear to still be a bit of an ass. Like, at some point, you just have to draw a line under it. But I don't think it's unreasonable to reflect on your own emotions and be like, am I in a space? Because also there's something about protecting yourself. Yeah. And if that conversation is going to do nothing but make you more angry and more whatever, you know, taking care of yourself first is also part of it. So there's nuance to it. Mm-hmm. But sometimes there's a colleague of mine who works in North America who was asked in an interview like this, how do you keep doing your advocacy work in the face of just all of these male, pale and stale people telling you that you're wrong? And she was like, fury. And they were like, pardon? And she was like, my fury is white hot and I have focused it into a driving force. And everyone was like, wow, okay. And she's like, that's what keeps me going, actually, is that. So sometimes it can be a positive emotion and sometimes it can be disruptive, and only you know that in that moment, in that setting.
Mm.
So we've kind of talked a little bit about the emotion of the person instigating the cup of coffee conversation. But should we be anticipating the reaction? Is anticipating potential reactions something that's helpful? Or do we just sit back and see what happens?
I think so. I've been on the receiving end of some of these conversations. Unashamedly. It's awful. It's a Breaking Bad news conversation.
Yeah.
Right? Because your first instinct is it's all the phases of the grief cycle. It's like denial and anger and negotiating. You're like, I didn't say that. I didn't mean that. Look, I said what I said was this. And what I meant was, and everyone knew I was joking, and I thought we were in a safe space, and actually, how dare you? And like, it follows that narrative with nearly everyone. And then eventually, if you take your time, they go, okay. And that can take anywhere from like 2 minutes to like an hour, depending on the person and the individual. The flip side is, if there's an insightful individual and they know it's coming, right? They know that they've messed up. They know they've said something dumb or done something stupid. And I've been caught off guard where people are like, I know what this is about. And you're like, really? Okay. And it's not like it's therapy, but it's like, okay, you tell me. And they're like, so last week, I said something that was completely unacceptable. And I realized as soon as I'd said it, and I was mortified, and so I left the room. So I didn't apologize. I ran away, and and you're like, okay, yeah. Can we talk about that? Can we talk about why you didn't apologize? But I think you have to, because again, when we imagine these conversations, we imagine the villain,
Yeah.
right? You are talking to some like super racist, sexist, horrible Marvel character, right?
Yeah.
But 99.9% of the time, you're talking to just a colleague who's done something dumb. Because all of the Vanderbilt work says most people are fine most of the time, and most people, when they're not fine most of the time, need a cup of coffee conversation, and then they're fine.
Yeah.
So most of these conversations are with not villains who just need their behaviours readjusting, who just need some feedback in a way that is about them changing. You know what, Mr. Fleming? Yeah, you gave the most inspiring careers talk. Oh, thank you. But when you talk about surgeons, you only talk about men. What? Yeah, it was really hard to hear. Oh. And of course, your initial thing is like, did I? Do I? Oh, well, all the surgeons I know. And of course, what you're looking for is, I'm really sorry. I will work on doing better, unless you have any suggestions. And they may do, they may not. But you have to consider the other person, because there are two people in that narrative. And if your goal is change, then yeah, you have to consider the person you want to change, because otherwise what you get, and I've seen this too, is it's really easy for the person to be like, idiots, right? If you said to me, Simon, we really don't like how much you swear in your talk today. And I was like, okay. And they were like, so we're gonna, just so you know, don't do it again or else. I'm like, I mean, you've met me, and I said I was going to use certain language that I know is emotive to get people. Oh, all right, fine. If you sat down with me and said, these are the reasons why, and this is how it makes us feel, and that it might be different. And so you have to consider the impact. Like, that respect goes both ways.
Yeah.
And I think that's the only way you leverage yourself, right, is by living those values. But it's not easy, especially when they're that 0.1% of people who are the villain, and you're like, I just want to shake you and shout at you. And
So then, do you think it's important to apply the coffee cup conversation to certain people? So say, for example, in a professional setting, would you change that to how you would approach it with a friend? Obviously, going in with tone, you wouldn't speak to a friend trying to break down everything in a professional setting. But in terms of hierarchy, say I was speaking to someone who's a lot higher above me, I would go in with the fear that the repercussions would be worse than having the conversation. So how do you then take away and apply the right tone to the right people?
so there's training for that. There's experience to that. And actually, I've had some cup of coffee chats with friends.
Yeah.
And they kind of respect it, because they kind of know that it's difficult for you.
Yeah.
And it's kind of nice to live because again, a big part of this work is it's very easy to people to undermine it by accusing you of favoritism, nepotism. Oh, well, actually, no, I had this chat with Simon last week.
Yeah.
Really? The same? The same. And again, the flip side is a bit like you shouldn't treat friends and family. There have been some conversations where I'm like, I can't do this one. I'm going to find someone else to do it because of the power dynamic. So there are undeniably people I couldn't call out if I wanted to.
Yeah.
Like, let's not kid ourselves. There are certain people I couldn't challenge even if I wanted to. So I just find other people to do it, because that's the power dynamic and that's the hierarchy. And I said it earlier today, right? I don't know anyone who doesn't have a boss.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone who doesn't have peers and allies. And so it's about finding that language, and whether it's the food in the teeth metaphor, or telling, you wouldn't want to tell your friend they've got body odor, but you'd hope that someone would tell you if you smelled. Like, you would hope that if you left the room, and every time you left the room, the other students were like, God, she's a nightmare. She just talks over all of us, and she's so rude. And you would hope that someone would go, what happens when you leave the room? But you would hope that they would do it in a thoughtful, respectful manner. And yeah, it may not be nice. And it may not make you feel great about yourself. And it may require some unpacking and some support and some all of that. But I'd want to know. I'd want to know if every time I left the room, everyone was like, thank God he's gone. Yeah. Especially if it was something that I thought I was doing that was good or great or effective or inoffensive or hilarious. Everyone laughs at my jokes. No. And they've done work with kids in school that shows, and chimps for that matter, that basically show they will laugh at jokes that are breaking them on the inside if there's a power dynamic.
Yeah.
So you can't assume that just because everyone's laughing at your jokes or everyone's smiling when you're in the room, that they're in a good place. But you would hope that someone would tell you. I would.
I think there was something that you said in the session we did earlier about the cup of coffee conversation often being led by a peer or a near to peer. And that kind of comes back to what you were saying is to the hierarchy, that there are just some people where it still is a cup of coffee conversation, but what's their near to peer is actually not your near to peer.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And I think that's actually something that's really important to think about, as to, we're not necessarily escalating, we're finding an appropriate peer to start still at the bottom of that pyramid. But, peer and near to peer is different for all of us.
Yeah, and having that made explicit, right? So no one is expecting a fresher to go up to the dean of the medical school and be like, listen here, let me tell you about your behaviours that I don't like. Now, it'd be great if they did, but it's whether they have that access, whether they feel safe to do it, whether they would be listened to. But he does have a lot of peers. He does have a lot of people and allies. And often you can find who those people are, and that you can start that narrative. You can start that conversation in a safe way.
Well, I'd love to continue this conversation for a lot longer, but I think we've got to let you run for your train, Simon.
Yeah, so I've heard.
So thank you so much for both joining us today. It's been a really interesting day and a very exciting start to a better me, a better you, a better us. Thank
for
you.
having me.
Thank you very much.